Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting 2 days, and thanks to all of you for staying around till the end. I love working with diehards. And this is a very important event. I would like to thank the Commissioner and President Barroso for inviting me to speak. And I agreed to come here because I agree with the thesis that what the world and Europe needs now is a lot more than love, sweet love. Europe needs innovation, and the world needs innovation. And if we're to get out of this mess that we're in, we're going to need to bring about some very profound changes to all of our institutions. And when you look around at Europe today, or for that matter, many parts of the world, it's very easy to get discouraged and overwhelmed by the profundity of the crisis that's shaping up. But in the next 55 minutes, I'd like to convince you of this idea that there's never been a more exciting time to be alive, and there's never been a time in human history where there were greater opportunities to rebuild our civilization around a new set of principles and around a new communications medium. By the way, often when I speak at events, people say, please turn off your cell phones. Would you please turn on your cell phones? And on Twitter, those of you who are tweeting, I'm at Tapscott. I always find it fascinating to listen to the conversation about my speech after I've given a speech. Let's begin. Some of you may have seen a book I wrote along with Anthony D. Williams 4 years ago, and it was called Wikinomics. And Wikinomics was about the corporation. And we introduced the idea of mass collaboration and collaborative innovation. And we argued that the internet is not about websites, eyeballs, stickiness, clicks, page views, hooking up online. It's becoming a new global computational platform that radically drops transaction and collaboration costs in our economy. And we argued that this is leading to the biggest change in the corporation probably in a century, to the deep structure and architecture of the firm, and how we orchestrate capability to innovate, to create goods and services, to engage with the rest of the world. We argued that innovation and talent can now occur from outside the boundaries of a company. And this is a very profound change. The book was a big book, and I was very pleased with that, and then something happened. We had the global meltdown of the financial services industry. And I remember the moment it struck me that something big was happening here. I was giving a speech, it was the closing talk actually, to a group called SciBoss. Any of you are bankers, you'll know what that is. It's 7,000 bankers, and they get together every year. And it just happened that the week of their global conference in 2008 was the week when the financial industry collapsed. And I looked out at this sea of deer in the headlights. And that's a very Canadian term. You're driving along in the country and there's a deer comes on the road and it just kind of looks at you. It won't get off the road. Well, I looked out at this sea of deer in the headlights and it occurred to me, Bob Dylan, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. That this is not just a time of changes to the corporation. This is a turning point in human history. That we have many institutions now that we need to rebuild, and the financial services industry is one of them. Who would have imagined 3 years ago that one of the big themes of business books today would be how to save capitalism, or is capitalism even savable? These books are not being written by radicals, they're being written by people like Matthew Bishop and Michael Green, the business editors of The Economist. Now, for some reason, I've ended up on the same, speaking at the same conference as Paul Krugman a few times. I don't know if you know this guy, Nobel Prize-winning economist, writes for the New York Times. And he gets up and he says, look, when you have the meltdown of a financial industry, you get a couple of decades of ugliness. Japan had one in 1992. They're still in a slump. So he says, get ready for a prolonged period of a slump in the global economy, and that's the good news scenario. Because a lot of worse things can happen, and you know about that. If for some reason you know, one of the big countries in Europe defaults on its sovereign debt, and Europe is not able to come together and to solve that problem, Europe would go, the euro would collapse, Europe would go into a depression, the US would go into a depression, and we'd be in a global depression. Now, my view is a little different. I mean, far be it from me to debate a Nobel Prize-winning economist, but to me, the future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future in Europe and in the world. But if we're going to do that, very different than the one that he describes. But if we're going to do that, we need to understand what the problem is. And the problem doesn't fall within the mental model, the paradigm of traditional economists who worry about things like the business cycle and should we have fiscal stimulation or more austerity. This is not a cyclical change we're going through. It's a secular change. This is a punctuation point in history where arguably many of the institutions that have served us well for decades or even centuries are now in various stages of being stalled or frozen or in atrophy or even failing. Contrasted with these sparkling new initiatives to rebuild these institutions, often through self-organization, to rebuild these institutions around an entirely new modus operandi. And that's the theme of my new book. Take a look around. I mean, we've been talking about many of these in the last couple of days. The corporation, the upper left there, the industrial age corporation. Arguably, the industrial age is finally running out of gas. I mean, the industrial age corporation was typified by General Motors, America's greatest company. It went bankrupt. We've got the financial system. The core modus operandi of Wall Street almost brought down the capitalist system, but it hasn't really changed. Newspapers are going away. There's 70 newspapers have gone bankrupt in North America. As one youngster said to us, if the news is important, it will find me. The whole problem that newspapers solve, I mean, this is not a problem anymore. Now, there are all kinds of big and tough issues that we have to deal with, but contrasted with these failure of these old models, we can see exciting new models of how we inform ourselves as a society. Our systems for global problem solving can't seem to solve problems. You look at something like climate change. It's a big issue. Bill Clinton was saying at Davos last year that if we reduce carbon emissions by 80%, not by 6%, by 80% in the year 2050, it'll take 1,000 years for the planet to cool down, and in the meantime, some bad things are going to happen. You can expect 1.5 billion people to lose half of their water supply in the next 10 to 20 years. We need to fix this. So all these nation states, they go off to Copenhagen and Cancun and you name it, they can't seem to come up with a deal. Meanwhile, on the other side, I estimate there are about 20 million people who are using the internet just to organize and do things around this. And they're not sort of Malcolm Gladwell's slacktivists. You know, he says, well, just because you go on Facebook and you go like, you're hardly changing the world. No, these people are actually doing things. They're like architects figuring out how to retrofit old buildings, and children in their schools trying to reduce the carbon emissions. This is the first time in human history where the world is being mobilized, and we're all, most of us, are on the same side. We've been mobilized before around world wars, but we were on different sides. Turns out that the killer app, as they say, for collaboration may be saving the planet, literally. So I could go on and on. I'm going to come back and discuss some of these. The universities, based on a broadcast model of learning, same with the schools. I mean, if somebody was frozen here in Brussels 100 years ago and they woke up today and they looked at the professions, a doctor in an operating theater, a pilot in a jumbo jet, an engineer designing a bridge, they'd think, wow, has the world ever changed? And technology's been at the heart of a change. If they walk into a lecture theater or a typical classroom, they'd breathe a sigh of relief. They'd say, well, I recognize this. the industrial age model of learning based on the lecture. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge, you're a student, you're an empty vessel, you don't have knowledge, get ready, here it comes. It's a broadcast model of learning. Mass production, mass distribution, mass marketing, mass media, mass education. All of these had the same modus operandi. If somebody in the center having something, knowledge, power, products and services, pushing it out to people who are passive recipients and inert. It was a great model compared to what existed before it, but it's now stalled. So, if you want to understand what's happening today and how to transform innovation, I don't think you go back, with respect to Paul Krugman, to 1991 or 82 or even the Great Depression. You need to go back earlier in history. All around the world, a few hundred years ago, we had agrarian societies, and the means of production and political system was called feudalism. And knowledge was tightly concentrated in tiny oligarchies. People just didn't have knowledge. There was no concept of progress. But along came Johannes Gutenberg and his great invention. And over time, different classes in the society began to acquire knowledge. And when they did, it didn't make sense for the old institutions. The old institutions started to appear to be stalled or frozen or in atrophy or even failing. It didn't make sense for the church to be responsible for medicine when people had knowledge. So you had the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. It didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to be running everything. So we had the French Revolution. That's what the American Revolution was. All the national democratic revolutions across Latin America. Eventually, we saw the rise of the modern university and science and the industrial age corporation and commercial relationships and new models of government, and it was all good. But it came with a cost. And now, once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle, only this time it's very different. The printing press gave us access to recorded information, the written word. The internet enables each of us to be a publisher. The printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The internet gives us access not just to information and knowledge, but to the intelligence contained in the crania of other people on a global basis, real time. This is not an information age. It's an age of networked intelligence. And that's what's transforming innovation, is collaboration that can occur on an astronomical scale unlike anything that we've seen before. Now, one more point before I come down from 90,000 feet here. What I just told you, these three ages, this is not new. I've been writing about this stuff for 30 years. Some of you may have read a book by Alvin Toffler called The Third Wave. Do you remember that? Agrarian age, industrial age. I think he called it an information age. We can cut him some slack for that. These are not new ideas. They were ideas whose time had not come. They were ideas in waiting. They were waiting for some objective conditions to mature to make them possible. So let me just spend a second on that. 4 big changes. The first is a technology revolution and the so-called Web 2.0. This is not the internet of the dot-com period. It's very different. First of all, you access the web now through billions, soon trillions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. I'm typically covered in these things. My door, my hotel here, is a chip in it. This thing has a chip on it. The door has knowledge, so does this thing. These two things communicate, and the door probably has an IP address, which means my door is an internet appliance. And I had a camera stolen from a hotel room in Miami. The door knew about me. We actually found an unauthorized access. I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address, which means it's an internet appliance. And all these things talk to each other. I have no idea what his refrigerator says to his toaster. But he was actually bragging that his fence talks to his sprinkler system. And I said, well, Ken, why would you care? And he says, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler's my first line of defense. So This is pervasive ambient computing, trillions of inert objects that become connected to the internet. Broadband, mobility, geospatiality, true multimedia, and the internet now connects in enterprises with real IT. The second big change is that we have the first generation to come of age in the digital age. And these kids are different. These ideas were waiting for the first generation of digital natives who had no fear of technology because it wasn't there. It's like the air. I started studying kids about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. At first I thought, my children are prodigies. But then I noticed all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So I started working with 300 kids. Some of you may know. It was back in 1997. I wrote this book, growingupdigital.com. Well, flash forward to today. They're not just growing up digital, they've grown up. They're coming into the workforce, the marketplace, into society, and there's no more powerful force to change the world than this generation. This is the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. I was an authority about model trains when I was 11. Today, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority on this digital revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, learning, publishing, innovation, every institution in society. Used to call it a generation gap. It doesn't exist. Kids and parents get along really well today. Look at your iPod and your kid's iPod. There's overlap. My parents didn't even like the Beatles, let alone the Rolling Stones. I mean, what we have today is what I call the generation lap, where kids are lapping their parents on the info track. And if you have a teenager in your house, you know what I'm talking about. Who does the systems administration in your home? So, this is humbling. This is a panel. This is a big crowd, about 6,000 people. On the left there, this is Rahaf Harfouche, living in Paris. Our boyfriend's in Toronto. They're apart for a year, so they turn on video Skype all day long to keep their relationship going. They cook together across the ocean. I asked her, I said, Rahaf, your generation, do you use email? She says, oh no, Mr. Tapscott, email is yesterday's technology. And I said, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? She said, email is sort of like a formal technology, say for sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. Two down from her, this is Sherry Kong, 20-year-old student in New Zealand, hired by the government, along with 80 other students. Her job? To teach the teachers how to use the internet in the class. I asked her, so Sherry, what are the teachers like as students? She says, they're awful. They talk in class. They don't do their homework. Beside her is the granddaddy of them all, Michael Furtick. I've known Michael since he was 13. He was the project manager on my website, growingupdigital.com, about 15 years ago. They made him the project manager as a 13-year-old because he was the oldest and most experienced on the team. So, Michael was a multimillionaire when he was 15, and he's created an extraordinary network. It's called takingitglobal.org. It's a million young people who want to change the world. So we fear what we don't understand. This generation is coming into the workforce, and they're bringing a whole new culture of innovation and collaboration and integrity at their fingertips. They have better tools than exist in our most sophisticated governments and corporations. And what do? They're real happy to have a job because of youth unemployment. We take them, we stick them in a cubicle, supervise them, treat them like Dilbert, and then we take away their tools. We're creating a generational firewall in the workplace. You want to fix innovation? The most powerful force for innovation is a demographic force. Now, you put those two together and you get a social revolution. And it's not just that there are over 800 million people on Facebook now. Social networking is becoming social production. The internet is not about websites, it's a new means of production. And again, this is humbling. Just a couple of quick stories on this. This was like 5 years ago. It was Christmas, and I gave my son Alex, who was 20 years old, third-year university, I gave him an advance copy of Wikinomics for Christmas, as a Christmas present. I gave him some other things. And he said, thanks, Dad. He went off. He started reading the book. He came back a couple hours later. He said, hey, Dad, this is a good book. It's like he's surprised or something like that. He says, I think I'm going to create a community on Facebook. And I wasn't on Facebook yet because it was just starting to change from .edu to .com. And I said, can I watch? 15 minutes later, he's got the Wikinomics community. Another 15 minutes later, he's got 6 members. By the time we're eating Christmas dinner, he's got 130 members in 7 countries, 7 regional coordinators, a president himself, a secretary, and chief information officer for the community. He sent out a PDF of the first 2 chapters of the book. Before I'm sitting down to Christmas dinner, I got kids writing in saying, Mr. Tapscott, we found errors in your book. And the community is placing demands on me. One of the kids writes in and says, exactly how will Mr. Tapscott be contributing to our community? Like, what is this? 2 words, self-organization. Self-organization has been around throughout human history. Language was a function of self-organization. So was science and government. But what used to take place over millennia or centuries can now happen on a single Christmas day. You understand this, it's a revolutionary force. Someone who understood it 4 years ago was Barack Obama. And he changed forever the way elections are conducted. Did he change the way you govern? Or do we still have the you vote, I rule industrial age model? Well, that probably hurt him. But again, humbling story. It was about 4 years ago. Someone sent me an email saying, do you know this guy, Barack Obama? He thinks your book, Wikinomics, is the key to winning the presidency and transforming America. Go to mybarackobama.com. And I went there. There's my book. It says, we believe in self-organization and transparency and using the internet in every way possible. And we believe in the book Wikinomics. And he's saying, I'm asking you to believe not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington. I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing and, well, my first reaction was, I am the man. But not so fast. Turns out I'm not the man, you see? Because I started looking around. There was a Wikinomics community. There was also a Young Firefighters for Obama community. And there was a Single Moms for Daycare for Obama community. He created a platform where 35,000 communities self-organized, and that's what brought him to power. Now, we'll come back to this later. The final big objective condition was a revolution in business and in the economy. Throughout the 20th century, we created wealth through vertically integrated corporations. And these things did everything from soup to nuts. And over time, with modern travel technologies, telecommunications, first the telephone, and then the telex and fax, and then early computer systems and the internet, collaboration costs began to drop in the open market. And that meant that vertically integrated companies, that was the industrial age model, could unbundle into focused companies that worked within networks. Cisco was a company that understood this, and it built a business web. Its competitors did not. They fell behind. And now, transaction and collaboration costs are dropping so much that peers can come together and create value. Peers in the sense of inside the boundaries of companies, across the old organizational silos and hierarchies. Peers in the sense of companies acting as peers. And the really crazy one is peers outside the boundaries of traditional corporations. So if you can create an encyclopedia that's 10 times bigger than Britannica, it's in 240 languages. Nobody owns it. The quality is just as good as Britannica, roughly, according to the big study that's been done. If you could do that through peer production, what else could you do? Could you create a computer operating system? Well, the Linux operating system is now the dominant operating system for medium and large computers. Linux will dominate mobile devices this year. Linux is used in nuclear power plants. Nobody owns it. And Linux just announced a big new customer, China. Imagine that. So, could you create a physical good, like a motorcycle? Well, the Chinese motorcycle industry is dozens, now probably hundreds of little companies. They all do a part. You make spokes and you make wheels and you collect the money and you do aftermarket support and service. There's no company. There's no OEM. There's no Harley Davidson pulling all the strings. They meet in tea houses and on the internet. This is now 40% of global motorcycle production, and get ready for the €1,000 car from China using the same model. So this is a huge change that's underway. These ideas were waiting for one other thing. They were waiting for the global economic crisis to create a burning platform. You know that analogy? You're on a platform, it's on fire, you have a burning platform. You have to get off. We have to get off now. We've got to stop doing these things in the old industrial ways that we have. So, what are the principles for innovation and for rebuilding these institutions around a new innovative model? 5 of them: collaboration, transparency, sharing, interdependence, and integrity. Let's start with collaboration. I'm going to tell you a story. This guy here is named Rob McEwen, and the reason I know this story, I'd love to say I have a think tank that scours the world for amazing insights and we find every incredible case. You know what? The reason I know this story, he moved across the street from me and he held a cocktail party to meet the neighbors. And he says, hey, I'm Rob McEwen. You're Don Tapscott. I've read some of your books. I said, great. I said, what do you do? And he says, well, I used to be a banker and now I'm a gold miner. He's a funny guy. He introduces his wife, Cheryl. He says, this is Cheryl. She's a gold digger. But unfortunately, she's an enormously competent person herself with a sense of humor. But he tells me this amazing story. He takes over this gold mine, and his geologist can't tell him where the gold is. He gives him more money for geological data. They can't tell him where to go into production. After a few years, he's so frustrated, he's ready to give up and shut the whole thing down. But he has an epiphany one day. He wonders, if my geologists don't know where the gold is, maybe somebody else does. So he does a radical thing. He takes his geological data, biggest secret in the mining industry, it's kept in safes and high-security computer systems. He publishes it, and he holds a contest on the internet called the Corp Challenge. It's basically $500,000 in prize money for anyone who can tell me, do I have any gold? And if so, where is it? He gets 77 submissions from all around the world. They use techniques that he's never heard of. And for his $500,000 in prize money, Rob McEwen found $3.4 billion worth of gold. The market value of his company went from $90 million to $10 billion. My wife and I were just vacationing with Rob and Cheryl, some other friends in France on their plane. And he told me the market cap today of Gold Corp is $36 billion. And I can tell you, because he's my friend, he's a happy camper. What did he do? He collaborated. He peered. Conventional wisdom, he should have fired his head of geology. No, he wondered, who are their peers? You know, the best submissions didn't come from geologists. They came from computer scientists, engineers. The winner was a computer graphics company that built a 3-dimensional model of the mine. Collaboration is not about a bunch of people in a room having a nice meeting. It's about radical new models of how we get capability to innovate. And there are seven of these that I like to talk about, and I'm noticing I'm a little behind, so that's for another day. You can invite me back. Theme number 2, openness. Now, whenever people think about transparency these days, they think about WikiLeaks. And, you know, of course it's not in the public interest that all diplomacy be held in the open, and of course government employees shouldn't violate their confidentiality agreements. But this is not what's happening here. WikiLeaks is not what's going on. What's going on is that it's the tip of the iceberg of a new age of transparency. And that companies are now being scrutinized like never before, as are governments, by their customers, shareholders, employees, business partners, the communities within which they operate. And as a company or a government, you're going to be naked. And if you're going to be naked, fitness is no longer optional. Or if you're going to be naked, you better be buff. You know? Meaning you better have good value, because value is evidenced like never before. You say, you're a good company, you got good products, they better be the best. But you also need to have values as part of your bones. And if you do, this idea is just exploded. This is a book I wrote 10 years ago that my mother bought most of the copies. It was like a study in bad timing. I've had a few of those over the years. But now, of course, everyone's talking about this. And TED Global this year in Scotland in June, the theme is radical openness. If you are buff, then transparency is a wonderful thing. It builds trust. It drops transaction costs. And transparency is your friend. You can open the kimono. You know that book, Dress for Success? Well, you can sort of undress for success and use transparency as a way of building an innovative and high-performance business model. Theme number 3 is sharing. Now, IBM gave away $400 million to the Linux movement. They placed $400 million of software in a commons. Why would you do something like that? Well, they saved $900 million a year developing their own proprietary operating system. They created a platform upon which they built a multi-billion-dollar business, and they also got to challenge Microsoft and change the competitive dynamics in the marketplace. People say, sharing, isn't that about communism? No, actually. It's about capitalism at its best in an age of networked intelligence where you need to be sophisticated. Theme number 4 is interdependence. You know, it's so depressing living in North America. You hear all this stuff, mainly in the U.S., about government. The best government is no government. The number 2 candidate for the Republican Party is a libertarian who thinks we shouldn't have government. The number 1 candidate is Newt Gingrich, who I won't even go there. You know what? There's a role for government, more important, arguably, than ever before. But the state is the foundation of society, but we've also got the private sector. And you heard Eric Schmidt here yesterday argue that the single most important thing you could do to help innovation is create the conditions whereby little companies can succeed. You can set up a company, get a website, be able to get your business going, hire people, change your business model, and so on. The third pillar of society is the civil society. And when you think back to Bretton Woods, the end of the Second World War, when the winners kind of got together and figured out what to do about the world, there were just nation states there. There were no private companies. They weren't pillars of society. Who's the most important organization in the world fighting for democracy in China today? I would argue maybe Google. Google is taking on the government of China. So there were no civil society organizations at Bretton Woods because there weren't any. There were 50 NGOs in the whole world in 1946. Well, now, of course, the civil society is a huge part. And then we've got a fourth pillar of society. You can be a pillar of society. 2 kids in Boston were pillars of society during the Haitian earthquake. They went on to Ushahidi and they found some text messages in Creole being communicated by someone buried in the rubble. It turned out it was a 7-year-old girl who'd been there for 5 days. She was dying. She was able to text. They translated from the Creole on the Ushahidi network. They triangulated her location, informed the authorities who came in and saved her life. 2 kids in Boston were pillars of society, helping to solve a global problem. There's no organization. So this is a time when we need new ways to work together. I think public-private partnerships, that kind of language, will actually go away because we need a lot more than public and private. We need these 4 pillars working together and a new division of labor in society regarding how we do many things. Finally, integrity. Arguably, that's why we had the whole financial crisis, was a violation of integrity. That the big banks, I'm a big bank and I'm going to lend some mortgages at a subprime rate to a whole bunch of people. I know they'll never make the payments. Then I'm going to bundle these up into a collateralized debt obligation. I'll get a bunch of rating agencies to rate at AAA. Thank you for that. I pay you, by the way. Then I'll get some insurance companies to insure it. And then we'll sell it to all the rest of you investors. You have no idea what you're getting. Oh, and then if the whole thing collapses, we'll create something called a credit default swap. That means we get paid anyway. And then when it does collapse, we go to the U.S. federal government, who this week, and it was announced, loaned $7 trillion to the banks at pretty much 0% interest. And the banks took it and reinvested it in treasury bonds. This is called an integrity violation. It's not being considered in the interests of others. So, now I'm not saying all bankers were involved in this or did this, but overall the modus operandi of the industry enabled this to occur. We need to move towards a new modus operandi. Now what I'd like to do is to end by looking at a few of these industries and just looking at the kind of transformation that I think we need to move. This is about innovation, not just in products and services, but in everything. We'll start with the old model of the corporation, industrial age corporation. Well, you know about that one. So what do we got? Well, Jay Rogers was an Iraq vet. He saw his friends killed in Iraq, and he decided the U.S. is over there to defend America's energy sources. As he put it, that are mainly going into a sclerotic automobile industry that's been unable to create cars that meet customer needs, that are fuel efficient, that are safe, that protect the environment. So he creates a new kind of car company using these principles and using the internet. He's got 5,000 designers, but they're all out on the web responding to challenges. He doesn't have a 3 million square foot manufacturing facility. He's got 30 manufacturing plants in 30 local geographies, hiring local people to build cars for 30 local markets. Could this scale? Well, the good news, bad news, I guess, for Jay Rogers, he's now got competitors doing the same thing. Talent can be outside. Idea agoras. You know the Roman and Greek agora? These are agoras for uniquely qualified minds. Procter & Gamble's looking for a molecule that'll take red wine off a shirt. They have 7,000 chemists inside, and they have 1 million outside that they can get to. And sure enough, they go onto the InnoCentive network. There may be a retired chemist in Brussels or a grad student in Taipei comes up with a molecule. P&G pays them a couple €100,000. They have a new product. 60% of all Procter & Gamble's innovation now comes from outside the company. You know that expression, our most precious asset, goes out the elevator every night. Your precious assets may never even be in the building. They may not even be inside the boundaries of your company now. And the next step in this whole thing is something called Inno360. It's a company that enables companies to build their own private idea agoras based on the internet. We have access to hundreds of thousands of people that only you have that kind of access. Threadless is a clothing company where its customers design its clothing. I call them prosumers, turning your consumers into producers. Your most important talent can be your customers. Doritos gets its customers to design its Super Bowl ads and plays these ads on the Super Bowl. Now, there's lots of controversy about the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and for sure it was late. It was the first time it was ever done. And the CEO of Boeing said recently, aircraft will never be designed the old way. The old way was the industrial age way. You create a spec of 20,000 pages with the talent inside your boundaries. Then you push it out to your supply chain, hierarchical, right? You beat up on your suppliers. They provide you with all this stuff. You assemble the aircraft. Boeing said no. He said, first of all, you're not suppliers. You're peers. You make the engine, the fuselage, the electronics, the entertainment system. And rather than a 20,000-page document, we'll give you a 20-page document. just describing what we're trying to achieve with this aircraft. And we'll co-innovate this together on our network. You know, the 787 Dreamliner uses 20%, 25% less fuel than its competitors. That's called absolutely killer competitive advantage through a new innovative business model. When you're flying in the 787 at 35,000 feet, it'll affect your body as if you're at 1,000 feet. You won't really notice, but then over time, you'll think, this is a great airplane. I feel better after I fly on it. So huge changes to the corporation. Very quickly on a few others. The financial industry. Well, we all know about this. How are we going to create jobs? Well, we know that the jobless recovery is not an acceptable situation. I hate that term. It's an oxymoron. It's like there is no recovery unless it's inclusive. It's like scented deodorant or jumbo shrimp or something like that. It's a contradiction in terms. And the key to solving this problem is entrepreneurship, because both in the United States and pretty much the same in Europe, 80% of new jobs come from companies 5 years old or less. And this is the halcyon days, or it ought to be, of entrepreneurship, because little companies can have all the capabilities of big companies now without the big liabilities, deadening bureaucracy, legacy cultures, systems, people, and so on. Why don't we have an explosion of entrepreneurship? Well, little companies can't get financing because of the hangover of this subprime situation. The big banks have in America, it's $1 trillion of toxic assets on their balance sheet. It's actually $1 trillion plus or minus $1 trillion because nobody knows what they're worth. And you can't mark them to model because there is no model. And you can't mark them to market because there is no market. Nobody wants to buy them. What do? How do we value these assets to get them off the balance sheets? Well, there are initiatives underway. This is one. I don't know if it'll work. It's called the Open Models Valuation Company, arguing that all the information about these assets should be placed in a commons, create a human genome of risk management, and bring the world's leading modelers, thousands of them together. In advance, we'll agree whatever they come up with, that's the value, and we'll have buyers and we'll have sellers. They value the assets, the banks can dispose of them, they can start lending money to little companies, we can start to solve this problem of the jobless recovery. Another problem is that venture capital is broken. Well, there are, again, sparkling new initiatives. Vencor, there's at least 3 of them in this room that I've met at this conference, where they're using collaboration to raise money and to support little companies. Vencor does challenges. Who's got the best solution to solving the traffic problem in the United States? 100 and something companies reply. There's a crowd of 6,000 people with weighted voting. The crowd gets it down to the top 10, then the top 3, selects a winner. Vencor invests in the winner. And then the crowd helps manage the company and helps with a liquidity event. This is venture capital 2.0. Wow, what an exciting time. How about the newspaper? Well, we got lots of things to worry about, how we're going to inform ourselves as a society. It's not just how do we get accurate news and have investigative reporting. How do we pay journalists? And how do we prevent this balkanization of the news? Because we can all follow our own point of view. We all end up in these little self-reinforcing echo chambers where the purpose of information is not to inform us, but it's to give us comfort. Well, there are a bunch of initiatives. Now, the Huffington Post is a step in that direction. It's not the whole answer. And the big complaint about the Huff was it didn't pay journalists. It's now paying 1,500 of its journalists. It's got good quality. Pulitzer Prize writers write for the Huffington Post. So, again, we're starting to see new network models of the news. Will they come up in time to replace the newspapers as over time they collapse? I think so. How about systems for global problem solving? You know what? I'm just going to flip through this one because I want to make sure we have time. Well, these are some good ones right here. Could we go back one slide? Is that possible? I don't know. Yes. Kiva. You know, for $70, you can get a pump to a little farmer in sub-Saharan Africa. And the farmer steps on the pump. You can irrigate a little field that can support a village. And our international organizations have difficulty getting that pump. So Kiva decides, microfinancing. We'll go on the internet, give us 25 euros. They've raised 250 million euros last time I checked. And they're doing all kinds of good things. This is self-organization. It's networks. It's applying these principles of innovation to solving a big problem. I mean, even something like the World Economic Forum is one of these new multi-stakeholder networks that brings together people from these four pillars of society. And Davos used to be sort of like a think tank. It's now becoming a do tank, where they've got a whole bunch of global agenda councils that are taking action to try and bring about change. Now, is this the right model? No, there are all kinds of different models that are underway. But it's an exciting time where these traditional institutions that came out of the Second World War, the World Bank, the United Nations, the IMF, the GATT, Global Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, and so on, these institutions have a role, but around the world, they're in various stages of having difficulty. Contrasted with these fabulous new initiatives where people are just self-organizing to solve global problems. Well, the universities and schools, I said in an earlier session today, the industrial age model of pedagogy. To me, the lecture is the process whereby the notes of a lecture go to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either. Now, I appreciate the irony that I'm standing up here giving you a lecture. But you know what? This is actually not a good way of learning. None of you are going to remember the 16 institutions, the 5 principles, the 7 business models. I'm just trying to convince you of one idea and to motivate you. And there's a role for a lecture to do that. We have an industrial age model. And it's a model that's teacher-focused. It's one way. It's one size fits all, and you're inert. You're passive recipients. Well, you know what? We can move to a new model. Technology is important in doing that, but it's not about the technology. It's a change in the relationship between the student and the teacher in the learning process. There have been some very interesting experiments underway. I was just talking to the Minister of Education of Portugal. He's trying to figure out how to make this amazing initiative in Portugal really work. And what they did, the spirit was right, and they decided every kid in Portugal should have a laptop. They did a big deal with Microsoft and with Portugal Telecom and so on. And in some of these schools, it's extraordinary. I mean, this is a school I was in, and these are 7-year-old kids. And the teacher says, today we're going to study astronomy. Everyone go to the astronomy blog. And then she says, I want you to learn about something called the equinox. Who knows what the equinox is? Nobody knows. So she says, okay, you know the deal. The deal is, go find out what the equinox is. So the classroom gets all noisy, and kids are working, they're grouping up, a couple of kids get together, they're on Google and Portuguese, Wikipedia, and finally this little group says, we know what an equinox is. They explain it to the class, the teacher's intervening, the other kids are asking questions, the kids are turned on, they're loving astronomy, they're loving learning, and they're performing better as a result. They're learning with the tools of their generation. Oh, we can't afford to do this. We can't afford to give our children their birthright, which is the most powerful tool for learning ever. I think we do a great disservice. This is a huge challenge that every country needs to address. Now, there's another big problem with the university, and it's not just the model of pedagogy. How weird is it that there are something like 15,000 statistics professors in the world, and they're all developing their own little PowerPoints and notes and exams and tests and software and so on. They're all doing that as part of their ivory tower. You know what? Universities need to create a meta-university. And the starting point is the MIT Open Courseware Consortium, where professors at MIT are placing all of this into commons. Now, initially, it's just about sharing material. But over time, what this is going to become is a collaborative development of the content, the knowledge that goes into our universities. Just a couple more here. How about science? What's the old approach? Well, governments, we put out RFPs, and we ask all of you to bid on the RFP. Please don't cooperate when you do. And then we're going to grant it to somebody. We sure hope it works out, but sometimes it doesn't. And when you're working on this, don't collaborate with others. Then you give it back to us, and then we're going to do something with it. I don't know, publish it as a paper or 2 years later. I mean, what's wrong with this picture? Everything. And the way that governments interact with science is endemic of a much deeper problem. That science is now arguably stalled today. You know, in the pharmaceutical industry, there's nothing really happening. There's no big, major drugs that we can expect, real big breakthroughs. And the fact the industry is about to fall off this thing called the patent cliff. Do you know about this? In the next the next year, 12 months, the pharmaceutical companies are going to lose 20 to 40% of their revenue, like that. Imagine that. You're a company, you're going to lose 40% of our revenue. What do? Cut back on office supplies? No. We need to fundamentally change the model of science. You know, the big pharmaceutical companies need to come together. And I was talking over dinner with President Barroso, and he actually convened a meeting of the CEOs of these companies in Europe, which is a wonderful thing to do. I'm working with the White House, where they want to do the same thing in the United States. We need to start placing a whole bunch of what we do in this industry into a commons. Failed results. I test this thing, it doesn't work. Everybody can have the data. Comparator arm. I test a compound, I got a control group, a placebo. I don't want to share that one, but I'll share these two. Proof of clinical mechanism, POCM. This is pre-competitive research. Why don't we share in this, and a rising tide will lift all boats. We did this for the human genome. GlaxoSmithKline, Andrew Whitty was here, just a wonderful human being and an amazing company. It's taking a real leadership role in trying to move the other companies in the industry to do this. There are a bunch of astrophysicists who they note that all these satellites are taking pictures of galaxies. They have millions of pictures. They figure it's going to take 100 years to categorize them all. But they found out that an amateur astronomer with 1 hour of instruction can categorize galaxies with roughly the same accuracy as a professional. You know, do they rotate this way, or are they elliptical, you know, and so on. So they created this thing called Galaxy Zoo, where they're going to have this done in a year. Thousands and thousands of amateurs collaborating together to advance science. So I'm out of time, so I'm just going to tell you what I was going to tell you, as opposed to actually telling you. We have an industrial age model of healthcare. I'm a physician, I'm a clinician, I have knowledge, you're a patient, you don't. You only get healthcare when it comes into the system, which is why it costs so much. You're inert. Don't collaborate or share knowledge with anyone else, whatever you do, because nobody knows anything except your professionals. Well, there was a guy about a decade ago, and his brother got ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He couldn't find anything out about it. So he built a community called Patients Like Me, for people with rare diseases. And they collaborate together now. If you have ALS, pretty much in any OECD country, you're on Patients Like Me. You're learning from others, and this is now a new foundation of science. So here's my modest little proposal for all the health ministers in Europe, should I ever get to speak to them. Let's reinvent healthcare around a collaborative model. Every baby born in Europe should get a website. It's half electronic record and half a social network for health. And it's like Facebook. You have a news feed, and you have a rare disease. You're part of that community. You can set up a new community. It's secure, but you have access and transparency into your own record. The data is provided by clinicians. This is not against the healthcare establishment. It's to support them. And just like Patients Like Me, this provides a massive foundation and database for science and for research. We could do this if we had the will. All right, I think I've just about run out here. We'll end with governments, because that's kind of an appropriate one. Well, the vertically integrated corporation arose at the same period in human history as the industrial age government. And bureaucracy was a really hot new management term 80 years ago. We needed bureaucracy to prevent graft and corruption and patronage and so on. But just like vertically integrated companies are unbundling into business webs, governments can create networks. This is not about government online or government portals or e-gov or anything like that. This is about a new division of labor in society regarding how we create public value. When you think about Europe, we can't tinker anymore. We need to fundamentally change the architecture of government. Just a simple little example. I was sitting with the CEO of Melbourne. They have a CEO. And I said, give me an example of some data. She says, bicycle accidents. We have data about bicycle accidents. I said, release it. Raw data. Be a platform. Don't create services. Curate them. Release that data. Within 24 hours, there'll be a Google mashup of bicycle accidents in Melbourne. You'll be saving lives in a week. It costs you $0 to do it. Bicycle accidents is one of tens of thousands of categories of data that's currently locked up inside governments that, if released, could unleash a torrent of public value as these four pillars of society self-organize. So Helsinki's doing with the city service map, British Columbia's applications for climate change, just conducting a challenge. Or you think about the amazing 2020 program. It's just extraordinary that you're doing this. Huge billions, tens of billions of dollars invested into innovation. Why not use collaborative innovation to stimulate innovation itself? Rather than holding RFPs, take a page from X Prize. It's not like, we want you to do this, and we're going to bet on one of you. It's, you go out and solve this problem, the traffic problem, and we'll have a complex process involving a crowd to select the winner, and the winner gets paid once you've actually built this thing. I think that we're talking about an order of magnitude more activity. You know that thing I talked about, the Intelligent Transportation System Challenge in the U.S.? Huge activity around this. You know what the prize was? $50,000. For $50,000, this huge network of innovation got created. So let me just wrap up here. I think we can change democracy, too. First era, we had accountable institutions, but there was a weak public mandate and inert citizenry. We can now move to a new culture based on public deliberation. And this is amazing stuff. This is going on now. The city of Bogota, using these kinds of techniques, it's a chamber of commerce actually, to reinvent the city, engaging the population of a city in its own reinvention. Final thought is there's been a big debate about the role of social media in social change. And after the Iranian Revolution, lots of people said the revolution will not be tweeted. And this was a good debate, and I participated. I said, no, it's important. Social media is changing the ability of people to self-organize. And then reality intervened in the debate. And reality had some names. Tunisia. The Tunisian Revolution wasn't caused by social media, it was caused by oppression. It wasn't created by social media, it was created by a new generation who was educated, who wanted jobs, and who didn't want to be treated as subjects. But the social media, just as it drops transaction and collaboration costs in the economy, it drops the costs of dissent. Now, this is very exciting, but it has a big problem. Up until a year ago, all revolutions in human history had a leader or leadership that could take power. These things happen so quickly they create a vacuum. And politics abhors a vacuum. So the next step is to use the new media to help us build secular, democratic, and open societies, because the big threats are the old regime, as in Egypt, is shown, or very extremist, undemocratic forces who would like to seize power. But my view is the train has left the station. The cat is out of the bag. The horse is out of the barn. The toothpaste is out of the tube, and this is an unstoppable force. Will it be restricted to the Arab Spring? Well, you know what? We've got big problems all around the world. The Tunisian revolution was called the unemployment revolution, 42% youth unemployment. It's 42% in Spain today. And we've got to come to grips with this. You can say, you know, the London riots, they were created by thugs and criminals, largely true. Just like for Occupy Wall Street, you can say they're a bunch of hippies and radicals and anarchists and so on. But there's something much deeper that's going on. When you have a huge transformation like the one I'm describing, you get dissonance. And if we don't make this transformation effectively and expeditiously, then we can see a global youth radicalization and a global mobilization that makes the 1960s look like kid stuff. So let me close then. 4 big changes, ideas that we're waiting for these 4 revolutions. 16 institutions, innovation is driving its way deep into these, and we're seeing the contours of a new set of open network models of just about everything, arguably, in our civilization. And we need 5 principles to rebuild these institutions for an age of networked intelligence. When you have a change like this, you get a leadership crisis. Vested interests fight against change, and leaders of the old are often the last to embrace the new. How are we going to find the leadership for change? You've self-selected as a leader, because leadership can now, in this age of collaboration, can now come from anywhere. So you look out at the world, you think, oh, Paul Krugman's right, we have this terrible situation, it's going to be very bleak. No, there's another route that we can take. We have a choice, but we need to find the will and the courage to take another route and to start to work together, to collaborate, to rebuild these institutions for a new age. Towards the end of the book, if we could just put that thing on, Anthony Williams and I started looking at nature to try and understand what an age of networked intelligence might look like, because we kind of ran out of examples of humans. And we studied bees, and bees come in swarms, and fish come in schools, and sheep come in flocks. Over the moors of England in the cold winter nights, starlings come in something called a murmuration. And a murmuration refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And throughout the day, the starlings are out over a 20-mile radius, sort of doing their starling thing, foraging for food and so on. And at night, they come together, and they create one of the most magnificent things in all of nature. And it's called a murmuration in reference to the birds murmuring their wings. But the murmuration's not just for show. It has functions. It protects the birds from predators. It warms the birds up for the cold night ahead. And in some of these videos, you can see a hawk that's actually being chased away by the birds, the collective strength of the birds. And, you know, is this just some kind of fanciful analogy, or might we actually learn something from this? Well, I look at this thing and I kind of see these principles. Big collaboration. There's a sharing of all kinds of information, location, movement. There are all kinds of rules that govern that, but also information about food sources. There's an amazing interdependence that somehow the birds behave as if the interests of the individual bird is somehow connected to the interests of the collective. And there's a great kind of integrity that gives the birds the courage to take on a fearsome predator. Is it possible, I'll leave you with this question, that as we connect ourselves across countries in Europe, around the world, connect our crania through networks of glass and of air, that we can go beyond just sharing information or knowledge, that we could start to share our intelligence? Could we create something greater than the intelligence of a human being? Could we create some kind of consciousness that transcends an individual or a company or a society. If we could do that, we could solve some big problems. You take something like the learning organization. Remember that one? Organizations have had trouble learning. Maybe it's because they didn't have consciousness. People have trouble learning if they're not conscious. When I give a talk, I try and make it interesting and even funny because I find that people learn more when they're conscious. Well, could we bring together this network intelligence? Well, it's not just a theory, it's kind of happening. I look at those kids today who are being shot in the streets of Syria as we speak. And I sort of see this thing. You know, during the Tunisian revolution, snipers associated with the regime were hunting down unarmed students in the street. And they took their mobile devices and triangulated the location so the friendly military units could take them out. And in Egypt, those kids knew that they can't go home. And they know today they can't go home because if they do, the regime will hunt them down and kill them. So, as we move towards an age of network intelligence, I get a lot of hope that this smaller world our kids inherit might be a better one if we can somehow find the will to do this. And that maybe this new period in human history will be an age of promise fulfilled and of peril unrequited. I certainly wish you the best, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Tapscott, for having joined us for this inspiring presentation. I'm sure you've changed our views on many of the issues you've presented here today. We are really grateful for you to be here. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, do not leave the room. We are now going to close the conference. We are welcoming a commissioner. We are welcoming the president of the ITRE committee, Mr. Royal. We are welcoming our director general. Please don't leave the room. You might need headphones. They are going to be distributed among you all. Just 2 minutes patience and we will go on. Come with us, yes. You are given the micro.
Das book.